The knock at the library door came like a shot. Duke Arthur Blackwood looked up from his ledgers, irritated. Rain slid down the tall windows of the grand library, and the fire had burned low. His butler entered with a face pale as candle wax.
"Your Grace, a gentleman from the Royal Bank. He says the matter cannot wait."
Before Arthur could refuse, the man was already inside, thin, sharp-eyed, dressed in a dark traveling coat still wet from the road. He carried a leather case clutched tight against his chest, and he did not bow low enough for a duke.
"Mr. Hargrove, Your Grace, Royal Bank investigator." He set the case upon the desk. "I have ridden 2 days without proper rest. I would not have done so for pleasant news."
Arthur rose slowly.
"Then speak plainly and be gone."
Hargrove opened the case. "Your father-in-law, Lord Fenwick, is ruined. His merchant banking house has fallen. For years he built his empire on borrowed gold and false promises, paying old debts with new lies. The whole of it collapsed a fortnight past. He has fled the country." The words meant little to Arthur at first. Fenwick was a distant name, a man he had met perhaps twice. "That is unfortunate for him. It is no concern of mine."
"I am afraid it is, Your Grace."
Hargrove drew out a single small bar of gold, dull and scratched. 6 years ago, Lord Fenwick's daughter came to you with a dowry, a great sum, enough to save this estate from the debts your late father left behind. That dowry sits still in your vault below, does it not? A cold thread of unease crept up Arthur's spine. "It does?" "It is worthless." Hargrove took a small knife and scraped the surface of the bar. Beneath the yellow shine, a dull gray metal showed through. "Lead, Your Grace, gold-plated lead. Every bar in your vault is the same. The dowry that saved Oakhaven was counterfeit from the first day, and now Lord Fenwick's creditors are calling in every debt tied to his name, including the one that keeps a roof over your head." The room seemed to tilt. Arthur gripped the edge of the desk. 6 years he had lived on a lie.
6 years the estate had survived on false gold, while the true wealth of his family bled away into farms and repairs.
"How long," Arthur said, his voice hoarse, "before I am ruined?"
"Days, Your Grace. Perhaps less." When Hargrove had gone, Arthur stood alone in the failing light, and a single thought burned hotter than all the rest. Her. Catherine. The woman he had wed for that cursed gold, and then locked away in the West Wing like an unwanted painting. She had brought this rot into his house. She would answer for it. He crossed the castle in a fury, boots ringing on stone, and threw open the door to her chambers without knocking. Catherine stood at the window, a shawl about her shoulders, a candle burning beside a table stacked high with papers. She did not startle. She did not cower. She turned to face him with a calm that stopped him cold.
"You have heard, then," she said quietly, "about my father?"
"You knew." Arthur's hands shook. "You knew the gold was false when you brought it to my door."
"I suspected." Catherine set down her pen. "I did not know for certain until later. My father was a charming man and a clever liar. He fooled sharper men than you, Arthur."
"Do not speak to me of clever." He stepped closer, towering over her. "You have ruined me. In 6 years you gave me nothing but a false fortune and cold silence. And now the creditors come to take my name, my land, everything my family built for 400 years. Sit down." Her voice cut across his like a blade. He was so shocked that he nearly did.
"You married a merchant's daughter and thought her a fool," Catherine said, and now her calm cracked, and beneath it he saw 6 years of buried fire.
"You shut me in this wing and forgot my face. But I did not spend those 6 years weeping. I watched my father's house rot from the inside. I knew what he was long before you did." And so I did the only thing a woman with no power could do. I made myself useful in the dark. She turned the stack of papers toward him, columns of figures, contracts, names of shipping firms and railway companies he had never heard of. Every penny this estate earned from its farms, its rents, its harvests, the small money you never bothered to count, I took control of it. I told the stewards I was managing household accounts. Instead, I invested it, quietly, carefully, into the new railways of the north and the great shipping lines out of the coast. Arthur stared at the papers, unable to breathe.
The false dowry is gone, yes, Catherine went on.
But while you ignored me, I doubled the true wealth of Oakhaven with your own coin. There is a fortune, Arthur, a real one, but it is locked in an asset auction in Highstone, and if we do not reach it before the creditors seize this house, we lose everything, the gold, the land, and each other. The silence that followed was the loudest of his life. Arthur looked at his wife, truly looked at her, for the first time in 6 years. Not the burden he had married, not the pale ghost of the West Wing. A woman, sharper than any banker, braver than any lord, who had fought to save him even as he pretended she did not exist. Shame and wonder rose in him together, choking his anger. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you save a man who gave you nothing?" Catherine's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. "Because your name became mine too, and I do not lose what is mine." Something broke inside him then. He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms, fierce, desperate. 6 years of ice shattering all at once. She stiffened, then clutched the back of his coat as though the storm outside had come indoors. "Then we do not lose," Arthur breathed against her hair. "We fight. Together." Outside, far down the dark road, the first horses of the creditors were already turning toward Oakhaven's gates. Sleep did not come to Oakhaven that night. Arthur sat in the library long after Catherine had returned to her chambers, staring at the dying fire, turning her ledgers over in his hands. The numbers told a story he could scarcely believe. A woman he had ignored had quietly built him a second fortune, while he counted her as nothing. Every page deepened his shame, and every page deepened something else too. A warmth he had no name for. The clock struck 2. And then he heard it. Hooves, many of them, coming fast up the north road, where no honest traveler rode at such an hour. Arthur was at the window in an instant. Through the rain, he saw lanterns bobbing in the dark, a dozen or more moving toward the gates in a tight column. Rough men on horseback, and among them, a wagon fit for hauling seized goods. A soft knock came at the library door. Catherine slipped inside, still dressed, a candle in her hand and her face tight with fear.
"They are here,"
she whispered.
"I saw them from the west window. Debt agents, the private sort my father's creditors always hired. They do not wait for courts. They come in the night and take what they please before a magistrate can be roused."
"Let them come," Arthur said grimly. "This is my house. I am a duke of the realm. They cannot—"
"They can, and they will."
Catherine crossed to him and gripped his arm.
"A paper of seizure signed by a ruined man's creditors is enough for men like these. By dawn they will have stripped the vault, the stables, the very silver from the table. And they know the grounds too well, Arthur. Someone has told them the way."
As if to answer her, a figure at the head of the column rode into the light of the gatehouse lantern. Arthur's blood ran cold. He knew that seat in the saddle, that tilt of the head, that fine coat that no debt agent could ever afford. "Julian," he breathed. His younger brother sat easy upon his horse, pointing toward the east court,
guiding the men through a gate that only family knew of. Arthur watched him lean down to speak with the leader of the agents, watched him laugh, and understood in one sickening moment the whole shape of the betrayal.
"He is with them," Arthur said. "My own brother. He has sold me to the creditors."
He wants the title.
Catherine pulled at his sleeve, urgent now.
If you are ruined, he becomes duke. He has waited years for a night like this, and my father handed it to him. Arthur, we cannot stay. If they take you, they take everything, and no fortune in Highstone will bring it back.
For a heartbeat, his pride roared at him to stay and fight, to meet Julian in the courtyard and demand answers like a man. Then he looked at Catherine's face, pale in the candlelight, and a colder, clearer thought rose above the noise. If he was captured this night, she would be left alone against Julian and a pack of hired men. That he would not allow. "The ledgers," he said. "Where are they?"
"In my satchel already. I packed them the moment I saw the lanterns."
He almost laughed. Even now she was 3 steps ahead of him. "Then we go," Arthur said. "There is a way out they will not know. Come." He caught up a single lamp, shuttered it low, and led her from the library, away from the grand halls where footsteps would echo, down a narrow servant's stair behind a false panel in the pantry wall. His grandfather had shown it to him as a boy, a passage the household staff had used for centuries to carry coal and linens unseen. It ran beneath the old kitchens and out toward the stable yards, low and damp, the stone weeping with rain. Behind them, deep in the castle, came the crash of the great doors being forced. Men shouted, boots hammered across marble, somewhere glass shattered. Catherine's hand found his in the dark. He held it tight and did not let go. They came out through a heavy door hidden behind the hay stores into the stable yard where the rain fell in sheets. The horses stamped and snorted, frightened by the noise from the house. Arthur worked quickly, throwing a saddle over his best mare, a strong bay named Sefton, who had carried him on many a hunt. He lifted Catherine up first, then swung into the saddle before her, feeling her arms wrap around his waist and the satchel of ledgers pressed between them. "Hold fast," he told her. A shout went up from the corner of the yard. One of the agents had seen the stable door swing. "There, in the yard! Someone's making for the horses!" Arthur dug in his heels. Sefton leapt forward, hooves throwing up mud, and they burst from the stable yard into the black night. Behind them, a figure stepped into their path. Julian himself, on foot now, arms wide as if to stop the horse by will alone. "Arthur," his brother's voice was half a snarl, half a plea. "Don't be a fool. Stay and I can protect you. Give me the title and I'll see you comfortable, I swear it." "You would see me in a debtor's cell," Arthur called back, "and my wife turned out to the road. Stand aside, Julian." Julian lunged for the bridle. Arthur wheeled Sefton hard to the left, and the mare thundered past, so close that Julian was thrown back into the mud. His curse followed them through the rain, thin and furious and swallowed by the storm. They rode, out through the broken east gate, past the astonished agents who scrambled for their own horses too late, down the north road and into the wild dark of the valley. Rain lashed at them, cold and stinging. Catherine pressed her face against Arthur's shoulder, and he bent low over the mare's neck to shield her as best he could from the wind. For a long while there was nothing but the drum of hooves and the roar of the storm. Then, when the lights of Oakhaven had shrunk to a faint glow far behind the hills, Arthur felt Catherine lift her head.
"They will follow at first light," she said against his ear.
"Julian knows we ride for Highstone. He is not a stupid man."
"Then we stay ahead of him." Arthur's jaw set. "How far to the nearest place we might rest unseen?"
"There is a coaching tavern in the Blackwood Valley, half a night's ride south. Travellers pass through it by the 100. 2 more weary souls under false names will draw no eye."
Arthur nodded slowly.
6 years he had ruled Oakhaven as a man ruling alone, trusting no one, needing no one. Now he rode into the storm with a woman at his back who had saved his life twice in a single night, and he found he did not want to face what came next without her. "Then to Blackwood," he said, and turned the mare toward the south. Behind them the castle burned bright with lanterns, as Julian's borrowed men tore the empty rooms apart, searching for a duke and a fortune that had already slipped their grasp. Dawn came grey and reluctant, the rain fading to a thin drizzle as the Blackwood Valley opened before them. The tavern sat at a crossroads where 3 coaching roads met, a low stone building with smoke curling from its chimneys and a yard crowded with mud-spattered carriages. Even at this early hour it bustled, grooms leading tired horses, drivers shouting for fresh teams, servants hauling trunks through the doors. Exactly as Catherine had promised, a place where no one looked twice at a weary traveller. Arthur drew Sefton to a halt in a quiet corner of the yard and helped Catherine down. Her fine gown was soaked through and streaked with road mud, her hair loose about her shoulders. His own coat, once the pride of a London tailor, hung heavy and ruined on his back. They looked nothing like a duke and duchess now.
"Let me speak inside," Catherine murmured, pulling her shawl up over her head.
"You have the bearing of a lord even when you try to hide it. It will draw notice. Follow my lead, and if the keeper asks, we are Mr. and Mrs. Bell, traveling to visit my sister in the south." Arthur bristled for half a moment. He was unused to being told what to do by anyone, least of all his wife. Then he thought of the men who hunted them, and he swallowed his pride whole. "Mr. Bell," he said dryly, "as you wish." The tavern keeper, a broad woman with flour on her apron, barely glanced at them. A coin bought a small room beneath the eaves and a place by the common fire. Catherine spun a soft tale of a broken carriage and a long night on the road, and the keeper clucked in sympathy and promised hot food. Arthur watched his wife lie with such easy warmth that he half believed her himself.
"See to the horse," Catherine told him quietly.
A groom will remember a gentleman who neglects a fine mare. I will lay out the ledgers.
By the time Arthur returned from the stables, Sefton, fed and rubbed down, Catherine had claimed a table in the far corner, away from the other travelers. A bowl of broth steamed before her, untouched. Her papers were spread across the boards, and in the firelight she looked less like a fugitive and more like a general studying a map before battle. He sat across from her. "Show me," he said. "All of it. No more secrets between us." Catherine looked at him a long moment, as though weighing whether he truly meant it. Then she began. "When I came to Oakhaven 6 years ago, I had nothing of my own but my wits and a small sum my mother left me before she died." She smoothed a page flat. "You gave me the household accounts to keep me occupied, I think. A task you believed too small to matter. The farm rents, the wool sales, the timber, the harvest money, pennies to your eyes." "Pennies," Arthur agreed, ashamed now to hear it said aloud. "I did not spend them on gowns or trinkets." A faint, wry smile touched her lips. "You will have noticed I bought very little in 6 years. Every coin I saved I sent north, to a man named Ashby, a broker my mother once trusted. I bought shares in the new railways being laid across the North Country, and in the shipping lines carrying iron and cloth out to the world, a little at a time, quietly, so no steward would question it." She turned page after page, and Arthur followed the figures with growing astonishment. What had begun as a trickle of farm money had swollen year upon year into something vast. The railways had boomed. The shipping had doubled and doubled again. The small pennies he had scorned had grown into a mountain of true, honest wealth. "This is real," he said hoarsely. "Not lead dressed as gold. Real."
Every shilling of it.
Catherine's fingers stopped on the final column.
But here is the trouble, Arthur. Much of it is not coin I can carry in a purse. It is bound up in shares and certificates held by a shipping magnate in Silverport, and the greatest portion of all is committed to a corporate asset auction in Highstone, a sale of railway holdings that will make the holders of these certificates richer still, or leave them with nothing, depending on who claims them first.
And the auction is when?
6 days hence. If we are there, with the certificates in hand, we walk away with a fortune large enough to clear my father's counterfeit debt 10 times over and leave Oakhaven richer than it has been in a century. If we are not,
She let the words fall away.
then Julian and the creditors take it all.
Arthur sat back, running a hand over his tired face.
He had spent 6 years believing himself the master of everything at Oakhaven, and in a single night, he had learned that his wife had been the true architect of its survival while he slept. The knowledge should have stung his pride. Instead, it filled him with a strange, fierce respect.
"You did all this," he said slowly, "for a man who never gave you so much as a kind word."
Catherine's composure wavered. She looked down at her hands, ink-stained and chilled.
I did it because I could not bear to fail. My father built his house on lies, and it fell. I wanted to build one thing in my life that was true.
She paused.
And because, foolish as it may sound, Oakhaven became my home, even the cold parts of it.
Something in her voice undid him. Arthur reached across the table and took her hands in his, and this time she did not pull away. Her fingers were like ice.
"You are frozen through," he said softly. "Come."
He drew her to the settle by the great hearth where the fire roared highest and sat beside her. Her hair, soaked from the ride, hung in dark ropes about her face. Without thinking, he took the cloth the keeper had left and began, gently, to dry it, lifting each heavy strand, wringing the water free, his rough hands careful as they had never been careful with anything. Catherine went very still. In 6 years he had never touched her so. In 6 years he had never looked at her the way he looked at her now, in the amber firelight, as though seeing her whole for the first time.
Arthur,
she whispered. Hush. His voice was low and unsteady. Let me do this one small thing. I owe you 6 years of small things, and a great many large ones besides. The tavern murmured on around them, the clink of tankards, the laughter of drivers, the crackle of the fire. But at that quiet corner table, something long frozen between a duke and his forgotten wife began, at last, to thaw. Catherine leaned into his shoulder, and Arthur wrapped an arm about her, and for the first time in either of their lives, the silence between them was not cold, but warm. Then, through the tavern window, Arthur caught sight of a rider in the yard, a lean man in a familiar fine coat, dismounting, scanning the crowd with sharp eyes. He tightened his hold on Catherine. "We must move," he said quietly. "Julian has found the road." They did not run. Running drew eyes. Catherine gathered her ledgers with steady hands while Arthur watched Julian through the window, his brother pushing into the crowded tavern doorway.
"The back," she murmured. "Every coaching inn has a kitchen door for deliveries. Walk slow. A frightened woman is remembered. A bored one is not."
Arthur marveled at her nerve, even as his heart pounded. They slipped between the settles, past a knot of drovers arguing over a card game, and out through the steaming kitchen where a cook shouted at a boy over a pot. No one stopped them. By the time Julian had elbowed his way to the common fire, they had already reached the stable yard, saddled Sefton, and ridden out the rear gate onto the southern road. He came alone, or nearly so, Arthur said as the tavern fell behind them. One rider. His men must be scattered, searching the roads. "Then we have a lead, but a thin one." Catherine's voice was tight against his shoulder. "Arthur, we cannot outride him on one horse for 3 more days.
He will change mounts at every posting in. We need speed he cannot match."
"The railway," Arthur said.
"The railway?"
She nodded. "Oakhaven Junction lies a half-day south. The southern line runs straight toward Highstone. If we board a train, we cover in hours what would take him days by road. But the station will be watched. It is the obvious place." By midday, they came down out of the hills and saw it. Oakhaven Junction, a long platform of soot-blackened stone, a great iron shed roofed in glass, and a locomotive standing at the head of a line of carriages, hissing white steam into the grey afternoon. Porters in braided caps hauled trunks. Ladies in bonnets and gentlemen in tall hats crowded the platform. And near the ticket office, lounging against a pillar with the ease of a man who knew his quarry must come, stood one of Julian's hired agents, watching every face that passed.
Arthur reined in behind a stack of freight crates at the yard's edge.
"There, by the office. He will know us on sight." "Then he must not see us as we are." Catherine studied the platform with narrowed eyes, the way a chess player studies a board.
"There, the coal wagons at the far end. The freight men wear plain jackets and caps. No one looks at a working man's face. They look only at his hands and his load."
She turned to him.
"You will not like this."
"Tell me."
"You must be a coal freight overseer. Off with the fine coat. Roll your sleeves, dirty your hands, pull a cap low. Walk as though your back aches and your wages are short. Overseers board at the freight end, away from the ticket gate. No agent watches the coal."
Arthur looked down at himself. A duke of 400 years' lineage, asked to blacken his hands with coal dust. 6 years past, the notion would have been unthinkable. Now he stripped off his ruined coat without a word, rolled his sleeves, and rubbed a handful of soot from a passing wagon across his knuckles and jaw. "And you?" he asked. Catherine had already drawn her shawl about her head in the plain style of a merchant's wife, tucking her fine gown beneath a borrowed grey cloak she had taken from a peg at the tavern. She pressed her ledgers into a market basket and covered them with a cloth, as though they were nothing but bread and cheese for the journey.
"I travel with the merchant wives in the second-class carriage, women returning from market. I will board through the crowd where a dozen bonnets look the same."
They parted at the platform's edge with a single look between them. No words, only a promise. Arthur made for the coal wagons, shoulders hunched, and set to helping a freight man heave a crate, calling out a gruff word about the load as though he had done it all his life. The agent's eyes swept over him and moved on. Catherine joined a cluster of chattering women near the second-class door, her basket on her arm, her voice pitched to match theirs as she remarked on the price of wool and the state of the roads. She was 3 steps from the carriage when a voice cut across the platform. "Catherine!" She froze. Julian stepped out from behind the ticket office, his fine coat immaculate, his smile thin as a wire. He had come himself, after all. "You always were the clever one," he said, moving toward her through the crowd. "My brother would have blundered onto the first train and been caught within the hour. But you nearly walked past me." His hand closed on her arm. "You will come with me quietly. There are magistrates who will take your hand from the lady." The voice was not gruff now. It was the voice of a duke, cold and absolute, and it turned every head on the platform. Arthur strode from the freight end, soot on his face, and yet somehow, in the set of his shoulders and the ice in his eyes, unmistakably a peer of the realm. Julian's smile faltered. "Arthur, how fitting. Playing at coal heaver. I am Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Oakhaven," Arthur said, loud enough for the whole platform to hear. "And this man has laid hands upon a lady in a public station. Station master!" A uniformed official came hurrying at the word Duke, bowing low. "This person is a debt agent's creature, harassing travelers on your platform. I command, by my authority as a peer, that the southern train depart at once, and that this man be held from the carriages." The station master, faced with a duke's command and a crowd of witnesses, did not pause to untangle the truth of it.
He blew a shrill blast on his whistle.
"Stand clear! Clear the platform! Train departing!"
"You have no funds, no house, no name left to command with," Julian shouted, but the crowd was already surging, porters slamming doors, the locomotive letting out a great sigh of steam. Arthur seized Catherine's hand and pulled her the last steps to the nearest carriage. He swung the door open, lifted her up bodily, and leapt in after her as the train lurched into motion. Julian lunged for the handle and missed, his fingers grasping empty air as the platform slid away. The carriage rocked and gathered speed. Through the window, Julian dwindled to a furious figure on the platform, shouting at the station master, at the agents, at the departing train, and then the shed's mouth swallowed the view, and there was only the green country flashing past. Arthur sank onto the seat, breathing hard. Soot streaked across his face, and a wild light in his eyes. Catherine stared at him. This proud, cold man who had just heaved coal and then thundered like a king, all to keep her from harm, and something in her chest turned over completely. He pulled her against him, holding her tight as the train rushed south, and neither of them spoke. There was no need. The thrill of the escape, the warmth of his arms, the miles opening between them and their pursuers, it said everything the 6 silent years never had.
"We did it," Catherine whispered at last.
"You did it," Arthur said against her hair. "I only shouted."
She laughed, a real laugh, bright and startled, and he found he would gladly heave 1,000 tons of coal to hear it again. The train carried them south through the long afternoon, past hedgerows and grazing sheep, and villages that flashed by like painted scenes. For the first time in 2 days, Arthur let himself breathe.
Catherine dozed against his shoulder, her basket of ledgers clutched even in sleep, and he sat still as stone so as not to wake her, watching the country roll past, and thinking how strange it was that ruin had given him the one thing his fortune never had. Night had fallen when the train shuddered, screeched, and ground to a halt. Arthur was at the window in an instant. Ahead, lanterns swung in the dark where the track climbed into the black shoulders of the Wyvern Mountains. A guard came down the corridor, grim-faced. "Rock slide on the line, ladies and gentlemen. The pass is blocked with fallen stone. A night's work to clear it, or more. The train can go no further this eve. All passengers must find their own way onward from the halt below." A groan went up through the carriages. Catherine woke and read the news in Arthur's face before he spoke.
"Blocked?"
"The mountain line. We are stopped." He helped her up. "We cannot wait a night and a day for the track to clear. Julian will not wait." They stepped down onto a lonely mountain halt, little more than a wooden platform and a shuttered ticket hut ringed by dark peaks. The other passengers milled in confusion, calling for inns, for carriages, for anyone who might carry them onward. Catherine drew Arthur aside.
"The creditors will guess we took the southern line. They will watch the main mountain road for a stranded duke and his wife."
She pointed to a rough track that branched off into the hills.
"But there is an old pass, the Smuggler's Road they call it hereabouts. Unpaved, dangerous, but it crosses the mountains and comes down near Silverport by dawn. No agent would think to watch it."
Arthur found a carter willing to hire out a battered private carriage and a pair of sturdy hill ponies, for a price that would once have insulted him and which he now paid gladly with the last coins in his purse. The carter took one look at the Smuggler's Road and refused to drive it himself. "That road's broke men and horses both," he said. "You'll drive it or you'll not go at all." "Then I drive it," Arthur said. The road was every bit as cruel as the carter promised. It clung to the mountainside in a thin ribbon of mud and loose stone, climbing through pine woods and out onto bare ridges where the wind howled and the drop fell away into blackness. Arthur held the reins with white knuckles, easing the ponies over ruts that jolted the carriage near to overturning. Catherine held a lantern out the window to light the way, calling warnings of every hole and stone. They were near the highest point of the pass, on a narrow ledge with the mountain rising sheer on one side and a steep ravine yawning on the other, when there came a sharp crack and a lurch. The carriage dropped hard to one corner. Arthur hauled the ponies to a stop. He climbed down into the mud and crouched by the wheel.
In the lantern light, he saw it at once. The iron rim had split and the wooden spokes had shattered, the wheel folding half beneath the axle.
"Broken through," he said grimly. "We cannot roll another yard on this." "Can it be mended?" "With rope and a fallen spar, perhaps, enough to reach the far side." He was already stripping off his coat, laying it aside, rolling his sleeves for the second time in a day. "Stay in the carriage, out of the wet. I'll not have you ruin what's left of your gown crawling in the mud." Catherine looked at him, this duke on his knees in the mountain muck, mending a wheel by lantern light with his own two hands, and she climbed down after him.
"Catherine, you cannot mend it and hold the lantern both."
She raised the light high, planting her feet in the mud beside him without a flinch. "And I did not ride through a storm and outface your brother to sit prettily in a broken carriage. Tell me what to hold." He looked at her a long moment, and then, to her surprise, he laughed. A low, tired, wondering laugh. "My grandmother would have fainted at the sight of a duchess in the mud." "Then it is fortunate your grandmother is not here." She knelt beside him. "Show me." They worked side by side beneath the wheeling stars. Arthur found a fallen pine spar and cut it to length with the carter's hatchet. Catherine held the lantern steady and passed him rope, her fine hands blackened, her hem thick with mud. He lashed the spar across the broken spokes, binding the wheel into a rough, ugly, workable hole. The wind bit at them. Once the lantern guttered and near went out, and they both grabbed for it at once, hands closing over hands in the dark, and neither pulled away. It took an hour. When at last the wheel would hold, they were soaked, filthy, and half frozen, and grinning at each other. "There," Arthur said, sitting back on his heels in the mud, breathing hard. "A duke's carriage mended with a hatchet and a prayer." Catherine surveyed the crooked wheel and burst out laughing, the absurdity of it all rising up in her at once, the fine lady and the great lord kneeling in a mountain bog binding a wheel with pine and rope. "If the county could see us now," she gasped. "The coldest marriage in England, mud to the elbows on a smuggler's road." Arthur went still at that. The coldest marriage in England. He had heard the whisper too, over 6 long years, and never cared to argue it.
Now he looked at his wife, her hair wild, her face streaked with dirt,
her eyes bright with laughter in the lantern glow, and he found the words rising before he could weigh them. "It was never cold on your side, was it?" he said quietly. "Only on mine. And I was too proud and too blind to feel it." Catherine's laughter faded. The wind dropped, as if the mountain itself had paused to listen. "No," she said softly. "It was never cold on mine." He reached out and brushed a smear of mud from her cheek with his thumb, and then, slowly, giving her every moment to draw back, he leaned in and kissed her. It was nothing like the fierce, desperate embrace in the West Wing. This was unhurried, tender. 6 years of silence answered at last beneath a sky thick with stars. Catherine's hand fisted in his muddy shirt and held him there, and the cold and the wet and the danger fell away. And for that long moment, there was only the two of them, and the mountain, and the light. When they parted, Arthur pressed his forehead to hers. "Whatever waits in Silverport," he murmured, "whatever the auction brings, I have already gained more on this wretched road than any fortune could give me." Catherine smiled and did not trust her voice to answer.
She climbed back into the carriage. He took up the reins, and the crooked, faithful wheel carried them down out of the mountains toward the first grey light of dawn and the sea. The mountains gave way to the sea, and Silverport rose out of the morning haze like a city built of iron and smoke. It was a place unlike any Arthur had known. Where Oakhaven was green quiet and old stone, Silverport roared. A forest of masts crowded the harbor, tall ships and steamers jostling at the wharves. Great foundries belched smoke into the dawn sky. And everywhere men hauled and shouted and hammered, the whole city ringing with the din of trade. Down the crooked mountain road the crippled carriage carried them, wheel groaning at every turn, until at last they clattered into the cobbled streets and Arthur drew the weary ponies to a halt near the docks.
"Mr. Vance keeps his offices on the quay," Catherine said, straightening her ruined gown as best she could. "A shipping magnate, one of the richest men in the north. He holds the certificates that prove I own a share of the fleet. Without them, we walk into the Highstone auction with nothing but numbers on a page. With them, we have proof no creditor can deny."
They found the offices of Vance & Company in a tall brick building facing the water, its windows crowded with clerks bent over ledgers. A servant took one look at the mud-streaked pair on the doorstep and moved to turn them away, until Catherine spoke a name, Ashby, and produced a folded letter bearing a seal she had carried inside her bodice through storm and mountain both. The servant's manner changed at once. They were shown up. Mr. Vance was a broad, shrewd man of 60, with a gray beard and eyes that had weighed 1,000 bargains. He rose from behind a desk piled with charts and bills of lading, and his gaze went straight past Catherine to Arthur, as a man's naturally will when a lord enters a room, however muddy his coat. "Your Grace," Vance said, bowing, "word of the Oakhaven trouble has reached even here. I confess I am surprised to see you. I had expected—" He glanced now at Catherine, and something in his look cooled toward courtesy alone. "That a gentleman in your position would send a man of business to settle his wife's little accounts, not attend to them himself." His wife's little accounts. Arthur felt the slight land, and felt his old pride rise to meet it. And then he saw Catherine, standing quiet at his shoulder, her chin lifted but her eyes braced, as though she had heard such words all her life and expected nothing better even now. In that moment, something hardened in him, clean and certain. "You mistake the matter, Mr. Vance," Arthur said, and his voice filled the room. "These are not my wife's little accounts. This is the whole of the Oakhaven fortune, and every shilling of it was earned by her hand, not mine. I did not build it. I did not even see it, blind fool that I was. She did. If you wish to speak of the Oakhaven holdings, you will speak to their architect." He stepped back, deliberately, and set Catherine before him. "You will speak to the Duchess." The office fell silent. Vance's shrewd eyes moved from Arthur to Catherine and back, recalculating, and Arthur watched the man's assumptions crumble and reform. Catherine stood very still. For a heartbeat she seemed unable to speak. 6 years of being the burden, the merchant's daughter, the ghost of the West Wing, and now her husband had stepped aside and named her master of it all before one of the richest men in the north. Her eyes glistened. Then she drew a breath and became, before Arthur's eyes, entirely herself.
"Mr. Vance,"
she said, and now her voice was crisp and sure, the voice of a woman who knew every figure in her ledgers by heart.
6 years ago, I purchased, through Mr. Ashby, a 1/5 share in the Northern Star Line and a holding in the Silverport to Highstone Railway concern. The dividends were reinvested each quarter per my written instruction, which I have here.
She laid a page upon his desk.
By my reckoning, the holding has quadrupled. You hold the certificates in escrow. I have come to claim them, that I may present them at the Highstone auction 6 days hence."
Vance took up her page, and as he read, his eyebrows climbed.
He looked at her again, no longer as a lord's decorative wife, but as a rival worth respecting. "By God," he said slowly, "you are the Ashby Count. I have wondered these 6 years who stood behind those instructions. I imagined a syndicate of grey old bankers, not—" He stopped himself.
"Not a woman," Catherine finished, without heat.
"No, few do."
Vance let out a short, surprised laugh, and something like admiration crossed his weathered face.
"Your Grace," he said to Arthur, "your wife has outtraded half the men on this quay, and they none the wiser. You are a fortunate man."
He crossed to a great iron safe set into the wall, worked the lock, and drew out a bound sheaf of documents heavy with wax seals.
"The certificates, every share as recorded. They are yours, madam, and gladly given. I have never enjoyed a surprise so well."
Catherine took them with steady hands, though Arthur saw her fingers tremble at the weight of what she held. The proof of 6 years of quiet, patient labor made real at last. She pressed them to her breast.
But Vance's face had grown grave. "I will not send you off with false comfort, however. There is trouble ahead of you on the road." He tapped a shipping bill on his desk. "A man came through here 2 days past, buying passage on the fast express to Highstone. A fine gentleman in a fine coat, asking after the very holdings you now carry. He gave the name Blackwood."
Arthur's blood went cold. "Julian!"
"He means to reach the auction before you," Vance said, "to lodge a claim against the estate, or buy the title outright while the certificates are still contested. If he stands before the exchange and swears the Oakhaven line is bankrupt, and you are not there to prove otherwise—"
"Then he takes everything." Catherine's jaw set.
"How did he pass the mountains ahead of us? We took the smuggler's road to save time."
"He did not take the mountains at all. He went by sea." Vance nodded toward the harbor. "The coast steamer, faster than any road when the wind is fair," and it was. Arthur and Catherine exchanged a look. All their hard miles through storm and stone, and Julian had slipped ahead of them on the tide. "Then we must be faster still," Arthur said. "Mr. Vance, the swiftest way to Highstone from your quay?" Vance was already reaching for a bell to summon his clerk. "There is a mail packet leaving on the evening tide. I hold influence with her master. I can secure you a berth. She will have you in Highstone by the day after tomorrow. A full day yet before the auction." He fixed them both with his shrewd gaze. "But understand me, your brother will have that day and more to work his mischief. You will not arrive to a quiet hall. You will arrive to a fight." Catherine's hand found Arthur's and held it tight. "Then we had best be ready to win it," she said. The mail packet brought them into Highstone on a bright afternoon, and the great banking capital of the realm spread before them grander than either had imagined. If Silverport was iron and smoke, Highstone was marble and gold. Broad avenues ran between tall stone banks and exchange houses. Carriages of the wealthy rolled past liveried footmen. Ladies in silk and gentlemen in tall hats strolled beneath colonnades that gleamed white in the sun. It was a city that ran on money, and it wore its money proudly. And into this glittering heart of commerce came Arthur and Catherine, soot-stained, mud-hemmed, their fine clothes ruined by storm and mountain and sea, looking for all the world like a pair of vagabonds who had wandered in from the docks.
"We must find lodging near the Royal Exchange," Catherine said, clutching the precious certificates in their oilcloth wrapping. "The auction is at the Exchange Hall 2 mornings hence. We need a place to rest, to wash, and to make ourselves fit to stand before that room. Half of winning a hall like that is looking as though you belong in it."
The grandest hotel in Highstone was the Meridian, a towering palace of a place.
its entrance framed by pillars and a doorman in gold braid. Arthur mounted the steps as he had mounted 1,000 such steps in his life, with the unthinking ease of a man born to grand rooms. But the doorman stepped smoothly into his path, taking in the ruined coat, the mud, the woman with a bundle clutched to her chest like a washerwoman's laundry.
"I beg your pardon," the man said, in a tone that begged nothing. "The Meridian does not accommodate, that is, the establishment has no rooms available for persons of your condition."
His eyes flicked over them, and his meaning was plain. Not for the likes of you. Arthur felt the old fury rise. Once he would have thundered his name and had the man dismissed on the spot, but he had learned much on the road, and he glanced at Catherine and saw that she was not angry at all. She was smiling faintly, the way she smiled when she saw 3 moves ahead. "Allow me," she murmured to Arthur.
She stepped forward. "You are quite right to be careful of the Meridian's reputation," she said pleasantly to the doorman,
"which is why you will wish to be careful now. The Commercial Lodging Act of the realm requires any licensed hotel of the first rank to furnish accommodation to any traveler able to pay, without regard to their dress or their road wear, provided they can meet the tariff and give surety. To refuse a paying traveler who meets the terms is to risk the hotel's license before the City Commerce Court. Shall I give you the surety, or shall I give the manager your name for the court record?" The doorman's confident face went slack. Behind him, a manager who had drifted near to observe the disturbance now hurried forward, having caught the words Commerce Court and License. Catherine turned her pleasant smile upon him. "Furthermore," she went on smoothly, "I should mention that my husband is His Grace the Duke of Oakhaven, and that we have been traveling by unusual means on urgent business at the Royal Exchange. We require your finest suite. You will find our surety more than sufficient." She drew from her bundle a single railway certificate, one of the lesser ones, and let the manager glimpse the seals and the figures upon it. "As you see, we are not quite what we appear." The change in the manager was total.
He nearly fell over himself. "Your Grace, Madam, 1,000 apologies. The finest suite, of course, at once. Reeves, take that is, this way, please, this way." Arthur followed his wife up the marble steps, past the crimson-faced doorman, and could not keep the wonder from his face. "The Commercial Lodging Act," he murmured under his breath as they climbed. "Is there truly such a law?" Catherine's smile turned wicked. "There is. I read it 3 years ago in one of the trade journals I studied to understand my railway shares. I never thought to use it. But a woman who runs a fortune from a locked wing learns to keep every weapon she finds, however small." She glanced sidelong at him. "You are not the only one who can command a room, Your Grace. You do it with your name. I do it with the law." Arthur laughed aloud, drawing startled looks from the marble hall, and did not care. The suite was the grandest in Highstone. High windows overlooking the Exchange Square, a fire already lit, hot water brought at once, and food such as they had not seen in days. They washed the road from themselves. Catherine's ruined gown was taken to be cleaned and pressed. A seamstress was summoned to make good what could be made good, and Arthur's coat brushed and mended until he looked once more like the lord he was. And then, at last, they were alone. No storm at their backs, no creditors at the gate, no mountain road or heaving sea. Only the two of them, warm and safe, in a quiet room high above the city. Arthur stood at the window as the lamps of Highstone came alight one by one below, and Catherine came to stand beside him. For a long while neither spoke. 6 years, Arthur said finally, his voice low.
6 years I lived under the same roof as you and never once saw you. I told myself the marriage was a bargain and nothing more. I told myself you were the price I paid for Oakhaven's survival. He turned to her. I was a fool, Catherine. The truest thing I ever gained was standing beside me all that while.
and I looked straight through her. Catherine's eyes shone in the firelight.
"I stopped hoping, she said softly. "Somewhere in the 3rd year, I stopped waiting for you to see me. I told myself I did not need it, that my ledgers and my figures were enough. I built a whole fortune to fill the place where a marriage should have been.
And now?" She looked up at him.
And now I find I was only ever waiting for this."
He drew her into his arms, not fiercely, not desperately, but gently, wholly, the way a man holds something he has decided never to let go. She lifted her face to his, and the 6 years of silence between them broke at last and fell away like ice from a spring branch. Whatever came in the morning, whatever the auction held, whatever Julian had schemed in his day's lead, none of it could reach them here. They had found each other across the wreckage of everything, and that, they both knew now, was the only fortune that had ever truly mattered. Outside, the great city turned toward night, and somewhere in its glittering heart, in a grand house near the exchange, Julian Blackwood sat over papers of his own, believing himself already the victor, never dreaming that the brother he had left ruined and fleeing was, at that very hour, 1 mile away, rested, armed with the truth, and coming for him. Morning came bright and cold over Highstone, and the Royal Exchange threw open its great bronze doors. It was the grandest hall Arthur had ever entered, a vast chamber of marble and gilt, its ceiling painted with figures of commerce and fortune, its floor crowded with the wealthiest men of the realm. Bankers in black, merchants in fine broadcloth, and lawyers with leather cases filled the tiered benches. At the front stood a long table where the auctioneer and the creditor's representative sat, and above them a raised dais where the estates to be liquidated would be called and sold. Among the names to be called that morning, the Duchy of Oakhaven. Arthur and Catherine entered late and quiet, dressed now in the fine clothes the Highstone tailors had made good. Arthur, every inch the Duke. Catherine, elegant and composed in a gown of deep blue, the certificates in a slim leather case beneath her arm. They took seats near the back, unremarked in the crowd. And near the front, exactly as Vance had warned, sat Julian. He looked well pleased with himself. He had spent his stolen day working the room, and it showed. Creditors nodded to him, clerks brought him papers, and he sat with the easy confidence of a man who believes the prize already his. Beside him sat a gaunt, gray lawyer Arthur recognized as the chief of the creditors' agents, the very men who had breached Oakhaven's gates in the night. The auction moved through its early business. Estates and holdings called and sold, until at last the auctioneer lifted a paper and read, "Lot the 12th, the Duchy of Oakhaven, its castle, lands and appurtenances, offered for liquidation against the outstanding debts of the estate, the said estate being declared insolvent by reason of a fraudulent dowry now proven counterfeit." A murmur ran through the hall. Julian rose smoothly to his feet. "My lords, gentlemen," his voice carried, warm and reasonable, "I am Julian Blackwood, brother to the former Duke. It grieves me to stand here, but the truth cannot be hidden. My brother's estate was saved 6 years past, by a dowry of gold that has since proven to be lead and lies. The debt is real. The estate cannot pay it. I ask only that the title and lands pass to one who will honor the family name and settle what can be settled." He spread his hands. "I offer to buy the estate entire and clear what portion of the debt I am able, that the Blackwood name not be dragged further through the mire. My brother, I am sorry to say, has fled. He is not here to answer, because he cannot answer. There is nothing to answer with." The gaunt lawyer rose beside him. "The creditors concur. The estate is insolvent. We move that the sale proceed to Mr. Blackwood's offer without delay." The auctioneer lifted his gavel.
Is there any party present who contests the insolvency of the Oakhaven estate? Speak now, or the sale proceeds.
There is. Arthur's voice rang the length of the hall. Every head turned. Julian went white as the marble around him, the blood draining from his face as though he had seen a ghost rise from the grave. For he had left this man ruined and fleeing in a storm, with nothing but a satchel and a broken horse. And now here he stood at the back of the Royal Exchange, rested, immaculate, unmistakably a duke, with his wife beside him.
Arthur walked down the center of the hall, unhurried, and the crowd parted before him.
I am Arthur Blackwood, Duke of Oakhaven, he said, and I am very much here to answer. My brother is mistaken on a great many points. Allow my wife to correct him. She is far better with figures than either of us.
He stepped aside, and Catherine walked forward into the center of the great hall alone. She did not falter. She had run a fortune from a locked room for 6 years. She had faced down doormen and magnates and mountain roads. A hall full of bankers held no fear for her now. She laid her leather case upon the front table and opened it.
Gentlemen,
she said, her voice clear and steady,
the Oakhaven estate is not insolvent. It is, in point of fact, one of the wealthiest estates in the north, and I can prove it, here, before you all.
She drew out the certificates, heavy with wax seals, and laid them one by one upon the table.
A 1/5 holding in the Northern Star shipping line held these 6 years and quadrupled in value. A controlling interest in the Silverport to Highstone Railway concern. Dividend records, verified and sealed by Vance and Company of Silverport, whom many of you know.
She turned to the auctioneer.
These holdings, at current value, exceed the whole of my father's counterfeit debt, not once, but tenfold. Every creditor in this room may be paid in full this morning, and the Oakhaven estate will yet stand richer than it has been in 100 years.
The gaunt lawyer snatched up the papers, scanning them frantically, his face falling with every line. He passed them to a clerk who checked the seals, who nodded grimly. The hall erupted in a rising tide of astonished voices.
Impossible!
Julian burst out, striding forward.
This is a fraud! Another Blackwood lie! These papers are forged, they must be!
They are sealed by Vance and Company, Catherine said calmly, and countersigned by the Highstone Clearinghouse not 1 hour ago. She produced a final paper.
I took the liberty, upon our arrival, of having them verified by the exchange's own registrar. He is present. You may ask him yourself.
A stout man in the registrar's robes rose from the front bench and inclined his head.
The certificates are genuine, and the value is as the Duchess states. I have verified them personally.
The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stood frozen in the center of the hall, his mouth working, his grand scheme collapsing to dust around him. The creditors, who moments before had been his allies, now turned from him as one, for a debt that could be paid in full was worth far more to them than a title bought for pennies, and the man who had promised them a bankrupt estate had led them into humiliation before the whole exchange. The Oakhaven estate is solvent, the auctioneer declared, setting down his gavel. The lot is withdrawn. The debts will be settled from the presented holdings. This sale is void. It was over. In the space of a few minutes, Catherine had turned certain ruin into complete triumph, and left the men who had hunted them across half of England with nothing but their shame. Julian rounded on Arthur, his composure gone, his voice a low and shaking thing.
You had nothing. You fled with nothing. How?
I fled with everything, Arthur said quietly, and he looked at Catherine as he said it, and never knew it until she showed me. You schemed for 6 years to take my name, Julian. You should have spent that time learning to see what was in front of you. I nearly lost everything for failing to.
You lost everything for the same blindness. Only you have no wife to save you from it." He turned his back on his brother and offered Catherine his arm. She took it, and together they walked the length of the Royal Exchange and out through its great bronze doors into the light, leaving Julian standing ruined in the wreck of his own ambition. 4 days later, a fine carriage turned up the North Road and passed through the gates of Oakhaven Castle in the golden light of an autumn afternoon. How different the return was from the flight. They had ridden out in the black of a storm, hunted, with nothing but a satchel of ledgers between them. They came back in daylight, at their ease, the debts cleared, the fortune secured, and the castle their own once more. Word had run ahead of them from Highstone, of the counterfeit dowry undone, of the Duchess who had faced the whole Royal Exchange and won, and the tenants and servants lined the drive to welcome them home, caps in hand, faces bright. Julian was gone. With his scheme collapsed and his creditors turned against him, he had no ground left to stand upon at Oakhaven. Arthur had signed the order of his banishment from the estate before they left Highstone, and the private agents who had breached the gates in the night were dismissed for good, sent back to their masters with nothing to show for their trouble. The castle that had been cold and divided for 6 years was at last at peace. Arthur helped Catherine down from the carriage before the great doors, and for a moment they simply stood together, looking up at the old grey stone.
"It looks the same,"
Catherine said softly.
"and yet it does not."
"Because we are not the same," Arthur answered. They walked the halls together that afternoon, and everywhere the change was felt. The servants, who for 6 years had crept about a silent house divided into the Duke's wing and the Duchess's, now saw their master and mistress walk arm in arm, heads bent close in easy talk. The West Wing, where Catherine had lived so long alone with her candles and her ledgers, was thrown open to the light. Arthur ordered her rooms moved beside his own, but he had one thing left to do, and he had thought on it the whole way home. That evening he brought her to the Grand Library, the very room where it had all begun, where the bank investigator had first laid the counterfeit gold upon his desk and torn his cold, comfortable life to pieces. The fire was lit and warm. Upon the great desk lay a document, freshly drawn, its ink still bright, and beside it a pen. "I had this prepared before we left Highstone," Arthur said. He drew her toward the desk. "Read it." Catherine bent over the paper. It was an estate charter, a formal deed drawn in proper legal hand, and as she read, her breath caught. It named her, Catherine Blackwood, Duchess of Oakhaven, as co-owner of the entire duchy, equal in title to the estate and its lands, and as High Treasurer of Oakhaven, with full and lawful authority over its whole fortune, present and to come. She looked up at him, and for once in her life she had no clever words at all.
"Arthur."
"For 6 years you ran this estate from a locked room, in secret, given no credit and no thanks," he said. "You saved it twice over, once with the fortune you built, and once again when you stood before the exchange and turned my ruin into triumph. I will not have it whispered any longer that Oakhaven was saved by a lord. It was saved by you. And I will have it written into the very deed of this house, so that no man may ever again look through you as I once did." He held out the pen. "Sign it. Take what is yours." Catherine's hand trembled as she took the pen. She thought of the young woman who had come to this castle 6 years past, the merchant's daughter, married for false gold, shut away and forgotten, who had stopped hoping to be seen. She thought of all the long, quiet years of figures and candles, of a fortune built in the dark for a man who did not know her face. And now here he stood, the proudest man in the county, laying his whole estate into her hands and asking her to take it. She signed,
Her name went down beside his, firm and clear, and the deed of Oakhaven became, for the first time in 400 years, the deed of two.
"There," Arthur said quietly, and there was something like awe in his voice as he looked at the two names side by side. "Now it is true in law as it is true in fact. Oakhaven is yours as much as mine, as are all its years to come."
Catherine set down the pen and looked at him, and her eyes were wet.
You know,
She said, with a small, unsteady laugh,
when I married you, I asked for nothing. I expected nothing. I thought a cold marriage and a warm library the best a woman in my place could hope for.
She shook her head slowly.
I never once imagined this.
They walked out together onto the grand balcony that overlooked the estate, where the last of the autumn sun lay gold across the fields and woods and rooftops of the duchy. All of it theirs, all of it safe, all of it shared. The wind carried the smell of turned earth and wood smoke and coming winter. Below, the tenants had lit the lamps in their cottages, one by one, so that the whole valley seemed strung with small, warm stars. Arthur drew Catherine into his arms. She came without hesitation now, resting her head against his chest, and he held her close as the light went gold and then amber over the land they had fought across half of England to keep.
6 years, he murmured into her hair. 6 years I called you my wife and never knew you. I claimed you once out of duty, for a dowry that turned to lead. I would give the whole fortune back this moment rather than have those years again.
They brought us here, Catherine said quietly. Every cold year of them. I would not undo the road that ended in this.
He tilted her face up to his. Then let me claim you properly, at last, he said. Not for gold, not for the estate, not for any bargain or duty ever struck between our families, but because I love you, Catherine, truly and entirely, and I mean to spend every year I have left making up for the 6 I wasted.
You need not make up for anything, she whispered. You need only stay.
That, said the Duke of Oakhaven, I can promise you forever. And on the balcony of the castle that had once been the coldest house in England, beneath a sky turning slowly to evening,
Arthur Blackwood kissed his wife, not as a duke keeping a bargain, not as a lord fulfilling a duty, but as a man who had at last found the one treasure worth more than any fortune, and had no intention of ever letting it go. Below them, the lamps of Oakhaven burned warm against the falling dark, and the long cold silence of 6 years was finally, wholly, and forever ended.